Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This Shabbos is a very special Shabbos. Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbat of the Vision. The Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, this coming Saturday night, is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. It's a day in which we mourn the first temple, the second temple, and many other Jewish calamities. But the Shabbos before is a Shabbos which is called the Vision. And the reason why that is because we read a special Haftorah called Chazon Yeshayahu, the Vision of Isaiah. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev would always say about this, that it's like a new suit. God gave a king comes and gives his prince a beautiful new suit. And he shows him this beautiful new suit. And the kid takes it and he goes and he runs around with all of his friends and he ruins the suit. So God loves his child. He makes him a second suit. Same thing happens again. God loves his child very much, but he knows he's not ready yet for the third beautiful suit. So he makes this suit, he puts it into the closet, and once a year he shows him this suit. And that says, when you're ready, God is ready to give it to us. We're living in a time which we see tremendous challenges. We see things that make no sense. We have the entire Europe now rewarding Hamas for making a Palestinian state after October 7th, while there's still 50 hostages behind the Iron Curtain. And Hamas just walks away from negotiations, all negotiations, every deal we try to make. Nevertheless, the world is just a world of insanity. And so we don't understand how we live in such a world. And while it's a world of chaos, on the other hand, God tells us that yes, there are times of destruction, there is times of challenges. But every single year on this Shabbat, God tells us there is a time which we're going to believe that there will be peace and security. God will rebuild the Holy Third Temple. And that's what it says. The 9th of Av, while it's the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, is also the day of the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. It says the birthday of the Messianic era happens on this Shabbat, on this Sunday. And so the Shabbat before, our soul subconsciously, knowing that, already long and pray for a time in which we'll have peace and security for all of Am Yisrael. It's also Shabbos Parshat Devarim. We open up the book of Deuteronomy. It's the final book, the 5th book, but it's also the first book which is considered the book of Moses, because it's Moses now repeating to the next generation all of the things that happened over the last 40 years. And one of the things we actually read about in today's Chitas, in the 6th chapter, Moses is recalling all of the wars in which they conquered one enemy after another enemy that God gave them into their hands. And one of them was Og, who was the greatest of giants. And over there, God, after winning each enemy, when it comes to the people of Og, God says, "Do not be afraid, Moses." All of a sudden, he tells them, "Do not be afraid." Before, when they were destroying the Amim, when they were destroying the Amorites, when they were destroying and being able to conquer each land, God never says, "Do not be afraid." Over here, God says to Og, "Do not be afraid." God says to Moses, "Do not be afraid." And why is that? So it's a very interesting Rashi. The Rashi in this Chumash tells us that what was Moses afraid? He was afraid of that his merits will protect him. What was that merit? And so if you go back all the way to the beginning of the Torah, the book of Genesis tells us the story of Lot. In the story of Lot, what happens is that there's it says, Vayavaya Palit. The Palit comes along, this person comes along, and he asks, and he tells Moses, at that time Abraham, that his nephew was taken. And he's telling him his nephew was taken. It says actually Rashi, it's one of the only places in Rashi that tells us what he was thinking. He was thinking that Abraham will go to war to receive his nephew who was hostage, and then Og will steal his wife. Og will take his wife. Sarah was one of the most beautiful women in the entire world. And so that's what he was afraid of. He was afraid of this merit. He was afraid that of the merit that Og ultimately saved Lot's life, but his intent was that Abraham should go into war and get killed so he can steal Abraham's wife. And nevertheless, God has to tell Moses, fast forward 500 years later, don't be afraid about Og and this merit. And teach something very powerful. In life, even when we don't have the right intentions, but we do something good, no matter if the intentions were bad, like Og, his intention wasn't good, but he did something good, that is how we're going to be judged. That is how God is going to reward us. And so even though Og doesn't do something, Og is thinking he's going to take Abraham's wife, but he ends up saving Lot. Because of that, he has merit so much that later on, 500 years later, God has to tell Moses, don't be afraid of him. you're still going to be able to conquer him. And it teaches the power of the deed, the power of the mitzvah, hamaisa wa ikar. As we go into this last day one of the last days of the 9 days before we go into Tisha B'Av, it's a time which we should think about a mitzvah, think about an action, do something positive. We live in the world of chaos. We live in the world that doesn't make any sense. We live in the world that is totally topsy-turvy, upside down. And nevertheless, we have to do positive. How do we fight the darkness? Is by doing something positive, by doing a good deed. Doesn't matter if we understand it fully, if we feel for it fully, just let's do it. Let's do a mitzvah, give charity, put on tefillin, light Shabbat candles, do something positive. And from there, God will grant us hopefully the time which we'll have. The 9th of Av will be turned from a time of sadness to a time of joy, with the coming of a time of peace and security. All of our hostages will be returned. The coming of Mashiach may be very soon in our days. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you tonight, 7:30, tomorrow at 10:15.